Good day, and welcome to the first episode of Driving Forward. We're going to see how this goes. I'm sure I'm going to make a ton of mistakes and learn as I go here. The first episode is going to be a solo episode with just me. I've talked to a bunch of people, and we thought that I had a somewhat unique story on how I got into transportation and how I've grown my career. So we thought exploring that over a few minutes and kind of putting it out there for discussion was a good place to start. So I appreciate your interest in the program. Please look for upcoming episodes that will be interviewing one or more people at a time. I'm excited to bring people on the podcast that come from my career and look to see or spend some time with them to review what they're up to in their careers and review the solutions that they're bringing to market today. Not to mention the stories, go over their stories. I'm very interested in finding a few of my former drivers and learning what they're up to today as well. So very excited to see if we can get a few people like that on the podcast and learn what they're up to. So with that being said, why did I get into transportation? Many years ago, I was in college for law enforcement. And I decided that law enforcement was not going to be a long-term career choice for me. And the something that my dad had said to me was, I can't back up a truck. So I decided to prove him wrong. And I went and I learned how to back up a truck. I did some heavy-duty towing. Actually, I really started out at a towing company first, doing dispatching and some light duty work and recovery. And then once I was able to, I went to a Class A school. I moved out of towing and went to a Class A school for Gainey transportation. The Class A school was in Fordyce, Arkansas. And it was definitely a unique experience for me. It was a significant culture change coming from Minnesota, moving to Fordyce, Arkansas for several months to get my Class A. And knowing what I know now in transportation, having run large truck lines and worked with large truck lines and worked with thousands of drivers over my career, I certainly wouldn't wish that experience on anyone today with the way that school was operating. But that being said, it was certainly an experience, and I did get my Class A. I did get lots of endorsements as well, and I did go over the road with Gainey for a period of time. My first load with Gainey was out of Kalamazoo, Michigan to Manhattan. And being a new driver, 21 years old, taking a load of steel case material to actually the World Trade Center was probably not the best choice for a dispatch, but I got it done. It was very interesting. Then I think 3 loads after that, my next load was a load of batteries going over the Eisenhower Pass. So I couldn't go through the tunnel because I was carrying hazmat. So the switchbacks over the mountains were probably also not the best choice to put a new 21-year-old driver on, but trial by fire, and I'm still alive today. I've done many other crazy things throughout the years as a driver as well. So, certainly any experienced driver, that's not a big deal, but it's business as usual, and it's how we get things done. But it's definitely not something I'd put a new driver on today. So, but that's how I got into transportation, or how I got into driving specifically. I was technically in transportation after my dad told me I couldn't back up a truck. So, but fast forward a while, I started to enjoy, really I got into the transportation side temporarily. I was just wanting to see the country, understand, kind of how the world worked, being a person and not having traveled a lot throughout my life. So I used the truck to kind of get around and understand, make the world a smaller place, which certainly driving over the road does that. You wake up on Monday on one side of the country and you go to bed on Saturday on the other side of the country. And suddenly the world becomes small. And so I got very interested in not only how the trucks operate and the machinery behind that and the technology behind that, but the functions and the processes and the idea around how to structure a trucking company and the logistics and the concepts around that. And that kept going through my head on this would be something that I might be interested in. So it wasn't too long after I got in a truck that I was looking to get out of a truck and into an office. So my next move shortly after that was to go back into heavy duty towing, because it was a simple move for me to get out of the over the road scenario and into an office again, where I was dispatching and doing some heavy duty work. Shortly after that, I spent about a year doing that again, and then ended up in a bulk fleet doing dispatch and safety work, which was kind of my target. I spent a little while doing that. It's really the first two mentors in the industry, being a young person in the industry. My first two mentors, Lee Arntz and Jeff Hamill. The company I was working for at that time was called Prairie Lines, a very small company based out of Minnesota. But they kind of showed me the ropes on this is how you operate a small company in the 90s. And we spent a lot of time together, and I still drove from time to time as needed, kind of the backup guy, but I instituted a little bit of a dispatch system that I had built on my own while I was there, because we were dispatching via paper, and built out a variety of different things. But I learned a lot from Lee, who was your old school trucker. And I haven't seen Lee in many years. I'm not sure he's still with us today, because he was not a young man in the 90s. But I learned a lot from Lee on how to move freight and how to work with people and drivers and et cetera. So after spending a few years with Prairie Line, I had an opportunity to move more into dry van freight. And that was kind of I think that was my passion anyway. It's what I really wanted to do. And I moved to a company called Major Transport, which brought me to my other two mentors that I consider in the industry, which is Wayne Huvestal and Tom Dahlberg. Wayne and Tom taught me a lot of things as well, kind of in a different style and at a different level. We grew that company to a much larger size than the previous company I was with. I spent many years at Major Transport, eventually selling that company. We made a lot of friends there. That company grew in size. I still have people from Major Transport that work with me today at GLCS. Learned a lot during that time in transportation. Technology was really taking off. We had EDI was around, but it was becoming far more known at mid and small fleets, far more adopted at mid and small fleets. Your mobile comm was being presented at mid and small fleets, far more adopted as well there. Everyone typically had some form of TMS. Imaging solutions were being adopted widely. It was, the tech growth in transportation. I became very interested and very very strong in technology at that time. Circling back to Wayne and Tom, Wayne enabled me to do a lot of things, being the owner of the company, and I think we were pretty successful with Major Transports, and I appreciate everything that he allowed us to do. We eventually sold that company. Tom taught me how to sell. He's a guy that's been around the industry for many years. Eventually, he started his own fleet and had that for several years as well. But learned a lot of things from Tom. So the number one, the way to sell in transportation, and and work with not only customers but other carriers as well. So that led me into 5 years where I shifted around between a few different fleets, including a fleet that I owned myself. But I ran a variety of carriers and logistics organizations over the next 5 years. Following that 5-year period, I joined TMW Systems prior to the acquisition from Trimble. And I enjoyed technology prior to this. It actually was something when we sold Major Transport, I had thought I was potentially going to go into consulting, and I never did. At that time, I was still fairly young. I never really went the consulting route after the sale of Major Transport. In 2011, I decided to take a chance and move away from the operations and management side of transportation and move into the technology side of the industry. And it's probably the best decision I've made throughout my career. I've known all the major players technology wise throughout my career. I've always been interested in that, but now I'm seated next to them for the most part. And at TMW Systems, I worked with hundreds of companies looking at their processes, streamlining their processes, and built out a team that optimized those processes over a 5.5-year period. It was a really great team. We had a wonderful group of people that we worked with there. There's some people that are still there today. I find that there's an alumni that is extremely respectful of one another. Many of us keep aware of where everyone's at and what everyone's doing, and it's kind of like a fraternity or sorority or some sort of group like that. So, but I envy my time at TMW Systems. It's one of my highlights in my career. And looking back at where I had worked previously, really, Major Transport and TMW Systems were two great employers that I can't replace. In 2016, I started GLCS, and the future at GLCS looks very good. We have a lot of business. We have a lot of customer interest. We've been growing month over month by several net new customers. So we're excited to see what the future brings here, but we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the mentors that I've had throughout the industry that kind of brought us along the way. Circling back on some of this, I also want to talk a little bit about all the drivers that I've known throughout the years. So I've talked to a few people today, and this podcast will continually circle back towards the drivers in the industry. It does not matter what role you have in transportation today. You would not have your role if it wasn't for drivers. And there are many drivers. I've called out several of them in social media over the last week with Driver Appreciation Week. There's many of them, and I can't even count them all, but that have impacted me, that have been just great people throughout the years. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. We wouldn't be here today. My career wouldn't have gone the way that it's gone. So thank you all for everything that you've done. I said it at every driver meeting I've ever been to. I'll continue to say it to every driver I ever meet, but thank you for what you do. You don't have to work for me. I actually work for you. And, whether you're driving for a customer of ours or you're the driver that works for a fleet that I've never heard of, it doesn't matter. We are here to support you and make your life easier. And sometimes you may not believe that, but ultimately there's a lot of people out here that are pulling for you. With that being said, we'll wrap this first episode up. Stay curious, stay informed, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Until next time, drive forward with purpose and innovation.